How Jimmy Garvin's biggest distraction ruined his matches. Jimmy Garvin's biggest distraction in the ring? His own valet, Precious. He was so caught up in impressing her that he kept losing focus on the fight. One look her way, one flashy move to show off, and his opponent would take full advantage. And it cost him dearly. Some of his most painful losses weren't because he was outmatched. They were because he let his attention drift to the one person who was supposed to have his back. Jimmy Garvin's career wasn't just about big matches and flashy entrances. It was also packed with controversy, and a lot of it had to do with his storylines. One of the biggest talking points? His on-screen drama with his valet, Precious. And here's where it gets really interesting. Precious wasn't just part of the show. She was actually his real-life wife, Patty Williams. That alone made their storylines feel even more real to fans, pulling them deeper into the drama. But it wasn't just about romance and wrestling, it was about intense rivalries too, especially his long-running feud with Kevin Sullivan. Now that storyline, it was something else. Kevin Sullivan's whole obsession with Precious turned what could have been a standard wrestling feud into something way more personal and intense. It wasn't just two guys fighting over a championship, it was about power, jealousy, and a woman caught in the middle. Fans were hooked. Every promo, every sneak attack, every heated stare down made it feel like something way bigger than just wrestling. It was entertainment at its peak, but at the same time, it also pushed boundaries. Some of the things that made it must-watch TV back then? Well, if you look at them now, they'd probably stir up a whole different kind of conversation. Wrestling in that era didn't have the same kind of rules, restrictions, or public scrutiny it has today, so a lot of stuff that aired back then might not fly now. But storylines weren't the only thing that got Jimmy Garvin's name wrapped up in controversy. Like a lot of wrestlers from that high-energy, high-pressure era, he found himself tangled up in the darker side of the business. Wrestling was brutal, physically and mentally. The constant travel, the injuries, the demand to stay in top shape, it led a lot of guys down the path of substance abuse, and Garvin wasn't immune to it. And when you mix that with the fast-paced, wild lifestyle that surrounded the industry at the time, trouble wasn't too far behind. And then there were the allegations. Wrestling has always had its fair share of scandals, but one of the biggest black marks on the industry was the ring boy scandal. In an era where misconduct in the wrestling world was rarely called out or investigated the way it would be today, a lot of things got swept under the rug. Looking back, it's clear that the industry was filled with questionable behavior, and some of the biggest names in the business, whether directly or indirectly, got caught up in it. But despite all of this, one thing's for sure, he knew exactly how to keep fans glued to their screens. He got his start in the business at just 16 years old. Way back in November 1968, wrestling under the name Beau James. But it didn't take long before he took on the persona that fans would come to know him by. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. With his flashy looks, cocky attitude, and in-ring skills, Garvin quickly made a name for himself. To add even more to his character, he was given two kayfabe brothers, Terry and Ron Garvin, even briefly managing them early in his career. From 1978 to 1983, Garvin was on the move, touring the Mid-South and Florida wrestling territories, competing against some of the best talent of the time. He won several championships along the way, but one of the biggest moments of his early career came in 1982 when he held the NWA Florida Global Tag Team Championship alongside Big John Studd. That same year, he also captured the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship by defeating Sweet Brown Sugar. But what really made this time in his career stand out wasn't just the gold around his waist, it was the introduction of a valet who would change everything. His manager, J.J. Dillon, presented him with a valet named Precious as a reward for his championship victory. But here's where things get interesting. The original Precious wasn't actually his real-life wife, Patty Williams. Patty would later take on the role, but before that, she was known as Sunshine 2. When Garvin was defending his titles, he often became distracted by Precious, too busy flaunting his good looks and trying to impress her instead of keeping his head in the match. And that cost him. He lost the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship to Dusty Rhodes, and he and Studd dropped the NWA Florida Global Tag Team Championship to Ron Bass and Barry Windham. After those losses, Garvin decided to make a change. He replaced Precious with his cousin Sunshine and took his talents to world-class championship wrestling in 1983. This was a turning point for him. In WCCW, Garvin was a heel through and through, refusing to wrestle on live television and riling up the fans. But things really heated up when he started a feud with one of the biggest names in the promotion, David Von Erich. That rivalry was full of classic moments, but one of the most memorable had nothing to do with what happened in the ring. As part of a stipulation, Garvin was forced to spend a day with Sunshine on David Von Erich's ranch, doing all sorts of chores. And let's just say Garvin was not thrilled. He had to wash David's 5 dogs while Von Erich sat back and shot skeet over his head, then move heavy hay bales without the help of a truck. But the final straw? Cleaning out the old horse barn. That was where Garvin had enough, and the whole thing turned into a wild, over-the-top confrontation. After his feud with David Von Erich, Garvin moved on to another top name in WCCW, Chris Adams. This was around the time that his wife, Patty, finally entered the picture as his new valet, taking the name Sunshine 2 and working as an assistant to the original Sunshine. But things got messy fast. During a match for the WCCW Television Championship, Sunshine 2 accidentally cost Garvin the title to Johnny Mantell. And rather than taking responsibility, she turned on the original Sunshine, blaming her for the mistake. That led Garvin to fire the original Sunshine and officially rename Sunshine 2 as Precious. The rivalry between Precious and the original Sunshine got personal fast, especially when Sunshine joined forces with Chris Adams to go after Garvin and Precious. They battled in mixed tag team matches, bringing even more drama to an already heated feud. Eventually, Sunshine left WCCW in 1984, with a storyline claiming she had been injured by Garvin and Precious. But that wasn't the end of things. She was replaced in the feud by her truck-driving aunt, Stella Mae French, played by Tanya West. Stella Mae and Chris Adams kept up the fight against Garvin and Precious, leading to one of their biggest matches yet, a loser leaves town cage match in July 1984. Garvin and Precious came up short, and as a result, they had to leave world-class championship wrestling. But that wasn't the end of Jimmy Garvin, not by a long shot. After leaving WCCW, he and Precious headed to the American Wrestling Association, bringing their unique mix of wrestling and drama to a whole new audience. They debuted in October 1984, and right away Garvin set his sights on the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. From late 1984 to mid-1985, he repeatedly challenged Rick Martel for the title. But no matter how hard he fought, he just couldn't get the belt. Even though he couldn't capture the AWA's top prize, Garvin still found success in the tag team division. In September 1985, he teamed up with Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, to challenge the Road Warriors for the AWA World Tag Team Championship. And with a little help from the Fabulous Freebirds, Garvin and Regal shocked everyone by actually defeating the dominant Road Warriors and winning the belts. It was a huge moment in Garvin's career, proving that he could win gold in any promotion. But championship reigns don't last forever, and in January 1986, Garvin and Regal lost the AWA World Tag Team Championship to Curt Hennig and Scott Hall. After that, Garvin's time in the AWA started winding down. His last match for the company took place at Wrestle Rock 86 in April, where he teamed with Michael Hayes in a steel cage match against the Road Warriors. Unfortunately for Garvin, he and Hayes couldn't pull off the win, and that marked the end of his run in the AWA. After dropping the AWA World Tag Team titles to Scott Hall and Curt Hennig in 1986, Jimmy Garvin was ready for his next big move. And where better to go than the National Wrestling Alliance's Jim Crockett Promotions, where the action was heating up. When he arrived, he came in as a cocky heel, full of himself as always, and immediately set his sights on Wahoo McDaniel. But rather than just taking him on in the ring, Garvin got under his skin in a different way, by constantly calling him Yahoo instead of Wahoo. It was classic Garvin, always looking for a way to get inside his opponent's head. The two ended up battling throughout the summer and fall of 1986, engaging in a brutal series of Indian strap matches, which were some of the most intense fights of the time. Garvin wasn't just tangled up with Wahoo, though. He also had an ongoing rivalry with Brad Armstrong and was just getting into a feud with Magnum TA, one of the biggest rising stars in wrestling. Unfortunately, that storyline never got to play out as planned because Magnum was involved in a career-ending car wreck. That incident shook up the wrestling world, but the show had to go on. Then in 1987, Garvin found himself in the middle of something even more personal. His brother, Ron Garvin, was feuding with Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. Things got serious when Cornette, always the sneaky manager, threw fire in Ron's face during a match. Several wrestlers ran out to check on him, but when Jimmy got there and saw what had happened, he completely lost it. He stormed into the heel locker room and went after Cornette like a man possessed. It took a whole group of wrestlers, both heels and babyfaces, to pull him off. That moment changed everything for Jimmy. From that point on, he was no longer the arrogant heel. Jimmy Garvin was now a fan favorite, teaming up with Ron to take on the Midnight Express. Their battles led to a major showdown at the 1987 Jim Crockett Memorial Cup Tag Team Tournament, where the Garvin brothers faced off against the Midnight Express. It was a hard-fought match, but the Express managed to win by countout and move on in the tournament. Garvin's biggest storyline of 1987, though, wasn't about titles. It was about Ric Flair and Precious. Flair, always the ladies' man, had his eye on Precious and started sending her gifts. This led to a dramatic build-up for a major cage match at the Great American Bash in Greensboro, North Carolina, with Flair's NWA World title on the line. The added twist: if Flair won, he'd get a date with Precious. The match itself was an absolute war. At one point, Garvin tried to leapfrog Flair, but instead he landed awkwardly on his knee. From then on, he sold the pain in his knee like a true pro, adding even more drama to the fight. The crowd was so invested that a fan actually tried to climb into the cage to help Garvin before commentator David Crockett stopped him just in time. In the end, Flair locked Garvin in the figure-4 leg lock, and the pain was too much. Garvin blacked out, and his shoulders hit the mat for a 3 count. After the match, Ron Garvin rushed into the cage to defend his brother from any further damage, attacking Flair in a wild brawl. And as for Flair's date with Precious, well, let's just say things didn't go as planned. Ron Garvin, disguised as Miss Atlanta Lively, showed up and knocked Flair and J.J. Dillon out cold. Just a couple of months later, Ron would get the ultimate revenge by defeating Flair for the NWA World title, holding it until Starrcade '87, where Flair won it back. One of the highlights of this feud came at Clash of the Champions 1, where Garvin challenged Varsity Club member Mike Rotunda for the NWA World TV title. It was a tough fight, but Rotunda came out on top, pinning Garvin to retain the championship. Then came one of the craziest matches of Garvin's career, the Tower of Doom match at the 1988 Great American Bash in Baltimore. This was a 3-tiered cage match, a concept borrowed from world-class championship wrestling. Garvin led a team of Ron Garvin, Steve Williams, and the Road Warriors, while Sullivan had his own squad. The match was chaotic, but Garvin's team managed to win. Still, his feud with Sullivan wasn't over yet. It all came to a head in September 1988, when Sullivan and Rotunda broke Garvin's leg. In a shocking moment on NWA World Championship Wrestling, Sullivan smashed cement blocks over Garvin's leg, while Jim Ross screamed, "He's breaking blocks all over his leg. Jesus!" Garvin took time off to sell the injury, but when he returned in June 1989, he was a different man. Gone was the feud with Sullivan. Now Garvin was fully embracing his longtime ties to the Fabulous Freebirds. He officially became a Freebird and teamed up with Michael Hayes to win the World Tag Team titles at Clash of the Champions 7. That night, they beat the Dynamic Dudes in the semifinals and then took down the Midnight Express in the finals. It was a huge moment, proving that Garvin wasn't just a singles star, he could dominate the tag team division too. Throughout 1990 and 1991, Garvin and Hayes kept the Freebird legacy alive, even adding a masked Freebird named Badstreet. They won multiple championships, including 2 World Tag Team titles, 1 6-man tag title, and 2 United States Tag Team titles. But by 1992, WCW was making budget cuts, and the Freebirds were among the casualties. After a brief singles run, Garvin left WCW in September 1992 and even got a tryout with the WWF. He cut a promo trashing the Ultimate Maniacs before Survivor Series 92, but nothing came of it. Instead, he took a break from wrestling and focused on becoming a commercial airline pilot. Garvin made one last WCW appearance in 1994 at Super Brawl 4, replacing Michael Hayes in a match against Johnny B. Bad. Then he joined the Global Wrestling Federation, where he reformed the Freebirds with Terry Gordy and Hayes. They even won the GWF tag team titles before the promotion folded in September 1994. That was the end of Garvin's in-ring career, but his legacy was already cemented. Years later, WWE recognized his contributions to the business. In 2007, he appeared in the Triumph and Tragedy of World-Class Championship Wrestling DVD, sharing stories from his time in the industry. He also appeared on WWE Classics discussing wrestling managers and the drama between Sunshine, Precious, and Missy Hyatt. Finally, on April 2, 2016, Garvin received the honor he truly deserved: induction into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the Fabulous Freebirds. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had entertained fans for decades with his charisma, skill, and unforgettable storylines. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.